Happy December, debaters of YouTube. And if you live in a place like Michigan, then happy winter. And most importantly, happy January 2022 topic. Last month, 3 of you stepped up to the plate to donate to Debate Track. And the following lecture is possible because of the generosity of these wonderful, beautiful, sun-kissed, angelic human beings. I do not deserve to be blessed with their gifts, but here we are. May God and the universe bless you and your families. May you win the lottery, even if you don't play. And may puppies always choose to play with you instead of anyone else in the room. If you see these people, please buy them a beer. Maybe a root beer or a ginger beer, whatever is age appropriate. Special thanks clearly to Mr. Stephen Brooks, who's legitimately encouraged this small program more than anyone else. In any case, this amount of money is far short of what I need to keep these gears cranking. So starting this month, we're monetizing, baby, moving into unwelcome but necessary territory. These lectures will remain free, but evidence and rebuttals will be paywalled at $5 a month. You'll also be invited to join an exclusive Discord room where you can ask me whatever questions you'd like. $10 a month will get you access to our PF Essentials course as well, teaching you the art of public forum debate. Now, I don't want money to be the reason you can't access these materials, so if you truly cannot afford it, shoot me an email, and I'll give you a free 1-year membership, no questions asked. The only caveat being that free memberships will not exceed paid memberships. So when you pay for one, you're helping out a student in need. Please ask only if you are a student in need. A final note, of course you can procure these materials through other methods. But it's truly likely that Debate Track and whatever we can do to help the debate community will disappear within months if that is the route you choose to take. So please procure it via a credit card. Now on to the lecture. The last video from last month was a bit on the long side as I've had some personal experience with crypto and I'm fairly passionate about crypto. This topic is about drugs. In today's video, I have some exercises scattered throughout the video to help you build some debate skills and solidify your understanding of the topic. I do recommend that you pause the video to complete each exercise before moving on, but this is totally up to you. Before we begin, one disclaimer. Drugs can be dangerous and cause long-term and permanent damage to your brain, especially for those under 20 whose brains are still developing. Remember that your brain is most of what makes you you. Your memory, your emotions, your personality, your motivation. So, damaging your brain is damaging you. While I don't wish to glamorize drugs, they certainly sell themselves well enough, I do hope to have an honest discussion about drugs. I think we all do, given this topic material. I don't believe drugs as a whole are uniquely important to exercise caution over. There's many things you should exercise caution over. Your sleep, your diet, your friendships, your exercise routine. They're all crucial for your quality of life and all deserve attention. But on balance, your life is likely to be better without drugs. Let us begin. So, starting with your topic itself, the United States federal government should legalize all illicit drugs. U.S. federal government should legalize all illicit drugs. We're going to break down this lecture, as usual, into several parts. First, let's talk about drugs. Next, we'll talk about the legality of drugs, including some history, followed by pro-arguments and con-arguments, and as we've done a couple times in the past, a weighing exercise to help you with weighing. All right, let us begin with drugs themselves. So, if we want to define drugs. There's many ways we can do that. And that's in fact what we're going to do in this section is just categorize drugs in various ways, right? So a drug can mean either a pharmaceutical, a medicine, say prescribed by a doctor, got at a pharmacy, something like this. And in general, these are thought of as, well, helpful, right? If used in the correct way, right? And then we have narcotics, which are used only for pleasure, for recreation, and these in general are harmful. So this is the breakdown that you would have if you went to school in the 90s or the 2000s and you were in a health class and your teacher gave you a lecture about this is what drugs are. Maybe they gave you a worksheet, categorized, these are good drugs and these are bad drugs. Clearly, this is an old-fashioned, out-of-date, and simply wrong way to categorize drugs, but it is useful as a starting point. So what we're going to be talking about legalizing is, of course, the narcotics, the drugs mainly used for recreation, mainly used for pleasure seeking rather than for some kind of medical use. So here is your first exercise. Get out a document or a piece of paper. Try to think of all of the drugs you can, all of the illegal or illicit narcotics that you can think of. Then go to this link, tiny.cc/drug list, and take a look at the federal government's list of controlled substances. Pause the video, go ahead and do that, write down the drugs you can think of, then take a look at this list. Ba-ba-da-ba-da. For most of you, you will not have gotten even a very, very, very small fraction of these controlled substances. There's in fact 18 pages in small font. I didn't count them, but hundreds certainly of substances that are controlled by the DEA. So we're going to look at different ways to classify these drugs. First, how socially acceptable they are. Some drugs are more, some drugs are less socially acceptable. Then we can categorize them based on the effects that they have on your body and mind. Third, by the popularity. Clearly, some drugs are more popular than other ones. And lastly, based on legality, which once again is important for this topic when we're talking about legalizing illicit drugs. But we're not going to cover all of the ways that we can categorize drugs. There's other very interesting ways to do it. For example, chemically, if you were to study, for example, organic chemistry, the way that you would group different drugs together is very fascinating, especially when paired with the effects sort of frame. Also, medically, if you're going to ask a doctor how to categorize these things, they might categorize them based on harm or lack of harm or on their medical use. Another thing we're not going to be categorizing here. And some people may even categorize drugs based on use methods. So do you smoke it? Do you snort it? How do you actually use this drug? In other words, many, many different ways that we can break down what drugs are and how to categorize them either socially or medically, etc. So we'll start with one social method of acceptance, and this will be activity number 2. Pause the video if you'd like to do this. I very much recommend it. I'm going to give you a list of 10 drugs, and I want you to categorize them based on how socially acceptable do you think they are, based on what are the effects, which ones would you group together, how popular do you think all of them are, and last, how about the legality? Which one of these do you think are legal versus illegal, or which are more illegal than other ones? So here are the 10 drugs: marijuana, meth, heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, amphetamines, LSD, benzodiazepines, alcohol, and cocaine. So these 10 drugs, I'll also put them in the description below so you can categorize them based on these sort of 4 different criteria. Take your best guess, and then we will see how you do. Pause. Wait. Let's take a look at the first social category of acceptance. So this is a ranking system that I made up by myself. But I think it's fairly accurate. I think most people might agree with this. So on level 0, we have prescription drugs. If you are getting drugs for a medical reason from the doctor, that is fine. In fact, that's responsible. If your doctor prescribes you something, you definitely should take it. I think that's the view that most people have about prescription drugs. So that is, let's say, 1 level, drugs from the doctor. Next, caffeine. So some people have sort of a bad view of caffeine, even a lightly bad view, but for the most part, very socially acceptable. 90% of American adults consume caffeine on a daily basis. So by a long shot, the most popular and most widely abused or used drug. Next, level 1, we might say nicotine and alcohol. Certainly, smoking cigarettes is bad. Drinking is bad. A lot of people know that. Some people might categorize one above the other. Cigarettes have certainly fallen out of fashion, but vaping is in, and if you use a patch or some gum, a lot of people probably wouldn't judge you, and they're legal, right? Level 1.5, we might have weed, which has for a very, very long time been illegal, but also for a very, very long time been socially acceptable, so, still fine. but a little bit getting to dangerous territory. Next, we have the cool drugs, so like hallucinogens, powdered cocaine, ecstasy. These are, we could think of like party drugs or like cool drugs, or if someone told you a story about using these, you might be interested and intrigued, but perhaps not turned off. Then we have worse illegal drugs, things like inhalants. So if someone tells you a story about snorting glue or sniffing some household chemical, that's not glamorous. That's not good. Benzos, we know, benzodiazepines, we know these are bad for your health, although a lot of these, of course, fit in prescription drug category. Barbiturates, perhaps also the same. And then we have the bad drugs, the things that you might never talk about if you use them. Crack cocaine, heroin, meth. These would be the big three that have really, really high level stigma around them. The ones that we think of as extremely, extraordinarily dangerous, very capable of destroying your life in a heartbeat. So I think most of you will roughly agree with this categorization of drugs. Obviously, some drugs we think of as fine, some we think of as really, really bad. And so this would be sort of ranking based on social acceptability. Next, let's look at the actual effects. So this might be, let's say, a pharmacological categorization. In other words, how do they affect your mind, right? And when we think about how they affect your mind, these would be physiological or pharmacological effects. We can break these down based on a number of things. So first, stimulants. These will be things that increase your blood pressure, increase your heart rate, make you more focused, make you less sleepy, give you more energy, maybe more focus. And yeah, these are the things that nicotine, caffeine, cocaine, all of these would fit in there. Meth and amphetamines, so something like Adderall, which are, pretty much the same thing, but then of course like caffeine would be like much less intense than cocaine or amphetamines, something like that. So stimulants, category 1. Category 2, depressants. So we have alcohol, opiates, benzodiazepines, once again, things like Xanax, and then barbiturates. These would be things that lower your blood pressure, lower your just your metabolism, lower your respiration, maybe make you sleepy or drowsy or have less energy, less focus, things like that. So kind of the opposite of stimulants in terms of what they do to your central nervous system. Hallucinogens, things like mushrooms or LSD, DMT, these are drugs whose effects are, you see stuff, you hear stuff, they give you sort of hallucinations, not necessarily delusions, in that if you see a dragon, you think it's actually a dragon. Maybe okay, I took a drug, I'm seeing this, but still things that like play with your mind. Probably the most interesting category of drugs, just in terms of art and how it's influenced kind of like the hippie movement, the psychedelic movement. Then empathogens, so things like MDMA. As you can probably tell by the name empathogens, it just one of the big characteristics is people have a great deal of empathy, right? And so that you'll feel like you're connected with everything, connected with the universe, that everything's like perfect and beautiful, MDMA can also be categorized as a stimulant and or as a hallucinogen. Some of these don't very cleanly fit into an effect category. Then we have dissociatives, things like ketamine or salvia, PCP. And finally, marijuana. Marijuana, it could have a number of different effects. The reason I think a lot of plants deserve a separate category is because it's a plant, So there's not a drug in marijuana. Of course, like CBD, THC, these are the most popular ones. But there's hundreds, thousands of different chemicals inside any given plant, right? So it's hard to just pigeonhole it in one thing because it can have like a great deal of different kind of effects. One general, let's say, symptom or effect of all of these drugs will be a feeling of euphoria, happiness. That's essentially why people like to do drugs. It makes you happy, makes you feel good, right? So that's sort of something that we'll see sort of across all of these recreational drugs, right? If people like to drink a cup of coffee in the morning, why do you drink a cup of coffee in the morning? Because it feels good. Like you feel better after you drink your coffee. Like that's why you do it. Same as like really any of these drugs. It's essentially like one thing most people are chasing is that feeling of, hey, this feels good. So once again, this is kind of like a play on the coffee taste chart, I guess. just with different sort of like different feelings associated with these different drugs, and I have the drugs listed here. So take a look at this if you're kind of more curious about how these are broken down based on their effects on the body. All right, so that's how we might categorize drugs based on acceptance, based on effects, and now we can look at popularity. So which ones do you think are the most popular? Surprise, surprise, it is the legal ones. So alcohol is by far, caffeine is not listed here. Caffeine would definitely beat alcohol. Caffeine is not seen by a lot of people as a drug, even though it totally is. But of the other drugs, alcohol, number one. Next, tobacco products. Nicotine vaping is broken down separately from tobacco products, so perhaps tobacco would be actual tobacco. And then we have marijuana, 32.8 million. These are, by the way, Americans who report using these in the last month. So we ask, hey, have you used alcohol in the last month? You've used tobacco products in the last month, etc. And these would be, it's not surveying all people, but this is like how many people in America would have used all of them, right, based on the survey data. So as you can see, the illegal drugs are used much, much less. And a likely reason for that is because they're illegal. This will be a big part of the con's arguments that when we make things legal, people tend to use them more, right? And we can see that by the chart. Lastly, based on legality. So we've already looked at what people kind of think of different drugs, the effects, which ones people use. We can look at which ones are more illegal. So the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, have a control system where they categorize drugs into 5 different categories. These are, let's say, controlled or illegal drugs, right? These would be the illicit drugs into 5 different categories. So I believe, for example, caffeine would not be considered here, right? Something like that. Alcohol doesn't seem to be considered here, but a lot of drugs that do have medical uses will be controlled here. But they're just things, even if they're medicine, perhaps they have some potential for abuse, so they throw them in here. So Schedule 1 drugs federally are drugs that have no accepted medical use, that have a high potential for abuse, and that are considered dangerous as well. So it's a dangerous thing. It's easy to get addicted. It's easy to abuse them, and they're not actually helpful for anything. Those are Schedule 1 drugs examples: marijuana, LSD, heroin, GHB, the date rape drug, and MDMA, also called ecstasy. So let that sit with you for a moment. Perhaps this is not the first time we've heard this, but marijuana is, in the same category federally as heroin. Clearly, we can't compare the two, right? It would be very hard to say. So let's say perhaps most people who use marijuana don't use it for medical reasons. Perhaps a lot of people who use marijuana abuse it. Perhaps it's bad for most people who use it. All of these things may be true, but you cannot say that marijuana has no medical use. That is absurd, but that is the position of the federal government. Now, of course, if you were to ask any of the people, let's say in the DEA or in the government, hey, can marijuana ever be medically helpful? I believe the vast majority, or perhaps all people, would say, yeah, there are some medical uses for marijuana. Some people could be helped by it, right? So it doesn't matter about the individual people or even the opinion of the populace of America, of American voters. As far as the federal government goes, marijuana is dangerous, addictive, and has no medical use. And this really talks to the ossified system of federal bureaucracy, right? It can't change and adjust as needed when opinions or views on things shift, or when we, as we'll see, come to find out that our policies have actually been horrible. Schedule 2 would be drugs that have same thing. So a high potential for abuse, high potential for addiction, but some possibility of medical use. So there are some use cases where they can be used medically. Morphine used for pain management. So you go have a surgery or something, you're in extreme pain, they might give that to you for acute pain. Cocaine, fentanyl, methamphetamine. I do not know where these are prescribed medically. Fentanyl obviously being the major driver for opioid deaths in America, killing something like 70, 80,000 people every year. I don't know how this is used medically. I'm not a doctor. Amphetamines, once again, these are things like Adderall. In terms of the effects on the body, pretty much exactly the same as methamphetamines, but they're a bit more socially acceptable, right? Because they are prescribed to people, for example, for ADHD, but it's a hard drug. It's speed, right? So extremely dangerous, but Schedule 2. Not like marijuana, Schedule 1. Schedule 3, steroids. So as we move down the list, we're looking at things that have less potential for abuse, less potential for addiction, and less harm, right? So Schedule 3, steroids, barbiturates, kind of like sleeping medicine. Schedule 4, some other benzodiazepines, once again, like Xanax. So this would be, by Schedule 4, we have fairly low potential for abuse, but if you know anything about Xanax, I mean, you can ask any doctor. I was actually prescribed this for a little bit, went into a doctor to get a refill on my prescription. He was like, bro, you have to stop taking these. These are horrible for you. Like, famous for causing, especially with long-term use, memory loss, cancer. Like, these are really bad things to be taking, but they are Schedule 4. And then Schedule 5 would be things like cough medicine that are mixed with things like acetaminophen. So there is some world where you could get high on it, but they're mixed with other drugs in such a way that you'd die before you really got high. So much lower potential for abuse. And then we have what are called designer drugs, which are sort of like drugs that are just chemically made, perhaps like variations on other drugs. So let's say that we make something like LSD illegal. Well, you can, add a certain chemical group to LSD, and then the effects are maybe slightly different, pretty similar, and now we have a new drug. That's not illegal, right? No, wrong. So 1986, the U.S. government passed the analog law, which prohibits new drugs that have similar chemistry and or similar effects to existing controlled substances. So chemists can't just make new kinds of drugs, say, hey, Uncle Sam, you didn't know about this yet, it's legal now. The government's like, no, we caught onto your tricks, we kind of see what you're doing. If it's chemically similar or effect-wise it's similar to a controlled substance, it can also be categorized as a controlled substance under the analog law. So that's kind of the breakdown. Once again, these are some different frames you can use to think of how to categorize and just classify different kinds of drugs. But there are other ways to do it, as I said, chemically, medically, etc. Okay, now let's look at the legality of drugs, including a brief history of both drugs themselves and also how they're treated in the US and in other countries. So to start, drugs are used by animals. Animals get high. So all of the animal and drug combinations I put here, you can literally watch these videos on YouTube of these animals all getting high on these things. And these are all naturally occurring things. So alcohol is naturally occurring in fermenting fruit. There's certain fruit trees, the fruit all drops to the ground. They ferment for a little bit. You eat them, you get drunk. That's how alcohol works naturally. So these are, cannabis obviously grows naturally. Pufferfish, obviously that's not made in a lab. And so all of these things you can look up on YouTube. The only point here is that like many human behaviors, we often think of drugs or other human behaviors as sort of unique or uniquely bad or uniquely modern. But in fact, if animals use drugs, we know that they've been used by humans since prehistory, right? We'll take a look in a second at the history of known archaeological discoveries of different drugs in human settlement, so we can date the use of certain drugs to earlier points in time. But in fact, we only have a very small record of history, right? We know very, very, very little about history. We just don't have good records for it. So if we found that someone was drinking alcohol 10,000 years ago, were they also drinking alcohol 100,000 years ago? Well, yeah, probably, because animals do it. So if animals are doing it, that means that it doesn't take a whole lot to figure out. It probably just happens, right? Drug use does happen in every country, even ones where it's prohibited. Even if you go to a country like, let's say, Iran, Saudi Arabia, tobacco is really common there. And alcohol is illegal, but you can still get alcohol on the black market. Maybe you have to go to a embassy party or, just pay an extra premium for your vodka or whatever. But drug use does happen in every country around the world. Generally, drugs are made illegal based on three different on a hierarchy, right? So the higher up you are in the supply chain, the harsher the punishment is. So if you have drugs, illegal drugs, there's some kind of penalty for that, right? But that's kind of the lowest level. If a cop finds you in possession of some kind of drugs for personal use, it's some small amount that you're probably just going to use to get high. That is a crime for these illicit drugs, obviously. But it's much worse if you are caught with a larger amount, because this shows that you're probably distributing it, you're probably selling it, and there also would be different penalties based on how much you have. Maybe obviously, right? So if you have a small amount to distribute to a few friends, it's different from you have a truckload full, right? That's a different kind of a thing. And then the highest up in the supply chain would be manufacturer. So if you are making the drugs yourself, that is like the worst crime of all. And then there are different attitudes. The topic that we're covering is the legalization of drugs, which means you can do it, right? It's fine. But it also means that, you can buy them, you can sell them legally, right? You can make them legally, you can probably market them, label them legally. This is different from decriminalization, which means that there aren't criminal penalties for using the drugs or for doing whatever else with the drugs, right? Perhaps distribution is decriminalized, perhaps manufacture is decriminalized, although that is unheard of, really. But perhaps use is decriminalized, which means you don't have to go to jail if you get caught using it. Perhaps you don't have to have a criminal record, but there could be fines associated with it. There could be other kinds of courts associated with it, perhaps some sentencing to like a rehab facility, something like that. So that would be decriminalized. You can think of it like other minor crimes, right? Jaywalking is not legal. It's not legal to jaywalk, but it's not a crime, really. Maybe if a cop is mad, he'll give you a fine for doing it, but you're not going to get a criminal record which prevents you from getting housing, prevents you from getting a job just because you jaywalked, right? Same if you litter. Like, littering is not legal. It's illegal. Don't litter, but it's not a crime per se, right? It's not something you would get on your criminal record. You apply to, I don't know, join the army or something, and they pull it up. Hey, you threw a Twix wrapper on the ground. No, it's like maybe you get a fine, right? And maybe that's about it. So decriminalization of drugs would be like that. Like, it doesn't mean that it's fine to do. And in terms of the law, there could be some kind of punishments, but it'd be more like a fine or some kind of a treatment rather than a criminal record. But legalization, so you can think of tobacco and alcohol as legal drugs because they are legal drugs. Does it mean that, 3-year-olds are allowed to smoke Newports in the middle of class? No, that is crazy. There are limits on age. There are limits on the time. For example, where I live, bars can't serve alcohol past 2 a.m., so there's some time restrictions. Some places have dry, like Sundays. On Sunday, you're not allowed to sell alcohol. So time and place restrictions, also age restrictions on these legal drugs. So if we're thinking about legalizing other drugs, this would likely be the model that we'd follow. Of course, there's also the prescription model, where, let's say, amphetamines are legal, but you have to have a doctor prescribe them to you. Opioids are legal, but you have to have a doctor prescribe them to you. So you can't go to the opioid store the same way you can go to an alcohol store. You can't go to the speed store the same way you can go to the alcohol store. So if we're thinking about all drugs being legal, then it would likely follow one of these models, either like the tobacco alcohol model. It's also the weed model now, where you have stores, marketing, etc. It's legal, right? Or you can think of following the prescription model, right? The problem is, remember that list of 18 pages of different drugs, the vast majority of those drugs don't actually have any kind of medical use, right? They haven't been studied for medical use. In any case, maybe they've been only used a handful of times. Perhaps some of them have never been used. I don't really know the history of all of them. But that's kind of how you should think of it once again. So we're not talking about little Johnny shooting up heroin in the middle of class. We're talking about like maybe, there's like a heroin lounge you can go to or something, right? Matching closer the model we already have with tobacco, alcohol, and prescription drugs. Okay, so a brief history of human drug use. Once again, animals have been using them as far as we're concerned, forever. These are just archaeological discoveries. So once again, it's sort of the earliest use we know about. The more modern history of drugs we have a better record of, obviously. But so 4000 BC, magic mushrooms were used in Europe. There's like some cave art. 3400 BC, opium was used in Mesopotamia. Hemp has been used for a really, really long time for essentially like rope, like building material, things like that. We know it's been used in Korea, 5,000 years ago. But marijuana use itself, we can date to 500 BC, 2,500 years ago along the Silk Road in China. This was discovered just a couple years ago. I believe this may have been one of the earliest discoveries of marijuana use that people were getting high. People were like smoking it, 1000 AD, ayahuasca being used in South America. South America, the Americas generally are newer than the old. The New World is newer than the old world, not just in terms of like Christopher Columbus, like quote unquote, like discovering colonization, etc. But I mean, like actually, like humans were not in the Americas. They were probably here like fairly recently, last like few thousand years. So 1000 AD. And then, so we have much better dates for more modern drugs. So morphine was isolated from opium in the early 1800s. 1889, Bayer started to market and sell heroin and aspirin. They invented both heroin and aspirin, and they also aided the Nazi regime. So Bayer, they're cool. 1938, LSD was invented by a guy named Albert Hofmann, thus setting off the psychedelic revolution. He was a chemist who like accidentally ingested it at his lab. Very, very highly potent drug. And so he like accidentally got some on his skin, I believe, something like that. Rode his bicycle home, had the first ever LSD trip, now known as Bicycle Day. Really good case in point, 91, 98, 2 books were published by this other chemist, Alexander Shulgin, Phycal and Tical, standing for phenethylamines and tryptamines I have known and loved. Phycal and Tical, where he published essentially recipes, essentially cookbooks, for 179 and 55 different drugs, respectively, right? So this guy, he was just a madman of like inventing new drugs. He was just a skilled chemist, and he was into drugs, so he made all these drugs, put the recipes there. I've never read the recipes. I don't know how easy they would be to follow. I imagine not that easy unless like you're an actual chemist with an actual lab, but still, there are plenty of actual chemists with actual labs out there. So this is mostly where those designer drugs come from. Famously made in Europe for a long time. As I understand it, mostly made in China now, but these would be, once again, like all of those analogs, all those new things that pop up. There was a sort of a trend where these were being put on different kind of herbs and sold as spice, bath salts. These would also be included in these recipes. All of these like weird, interesting drugs people make, and sometimes try to sell kind of under the cover. These would be mostly from these cookbooks. Overall, the FDA has also approved 7,500 prescription drugs. So these are not all psychoactive, meaning that they change your experience, your brain chemistry, and therefore experience. A lot of these just have physiological effects rather than effects on your brain, on your experience. So 7,500 prescription drugs that the FDA has approved, although there's many, many, many other drugs. So I don't know what the history of all these drugs are, but I would venture to guess the vast majority of them have been invented in the last couple hundred years. Looking at U.S. prohibition. So 1960s, the government started to put regulations on prescription drugs to make sure that people were not selling snake oil, right? So before the internet, before like solid science education, some dude with a carriage, comes through your town selling something to, he says, cure some issue that you've had for the last 7 years, your bum elbow or your hip issue or your gout or whatever, right? Look, people weren't dumb in 1960. They just didn't have the internet. So, like, would you maybe you'd spend 5 cents to try to see if it would help your gout, even though you knew it probably wouldn't, you know? This was obviously like very easy to do. So the government had to step in and be like, nah, you can't do that. So there are a lot of prescription drug regulations in 1860. Very solid move on the government. Go Uncle Sam. 1914, heroin and cocaine are made illegal. Even though, you know, obviously like cocaine was used in Coca-Cola, like heroin was just sold like over the counter by Bayer. So yeah, had a few decades there, right? Alcohol was made illegal in 1920. Prohibition lasted for 13 years. Very long time to not have a drink. This was triggered by two major things. First, so there's always kind of a prohibitionist movement. You know, if you've ever been around someone who really gets into drinking, you know it's not good for you. If you've ever been someone who's like really been into drinking, you know it's not good for you. Like, alcohol is a very, very nice way to just ruin your life if that's what you're looking to do. And everyone knows this. I mean, you know, most religions, you know, Christianity, Islam, much more, you know, Hinduism to some degree, Buddhism for sure, have prohibitions against alcohol because alcohol has been around forever. Once again, animals get drunk and we know it's awful for you. Like science has only confirmed just the intricacies, the details of how awful it is for you, but damn, we've known forever that it's not good. So this prohibitionist movement has been kind of a long-standing thing. You know, people who really want their society just be clean, be better. Maybe they know some people who are drunk and they just wish they weren't. But this was combined with World War I, the start of World War I, where it was necessary to really mobilize the country's resources in order to fight this war effort, right, for the Great War. So part of the justification was that they need to save grain because this is essentially for beer, right? Like Prohibition really made liquor much more popular because if you're going to buy something illegally, it better work, right? It better be highly concentrated and really do the job, right? You don't want to buy a beer and risk going to jail. You want to buy a bottle of vodka, right? If you're gonna do it, like, you know, go big. But that aside, like, beer is like quite popular. It like makes you feel good pretty quickly. It's got a lot of like carbs in it, so you get that kind of like sugar rush. So beer was super, super popular, but it takes a lot of grain, and so to fight the war effort, the government made beer and all alcohol illegal. But there's also some anti-German sentiment that kind of played into that because most of the breweries were from like American Germans, and we were fighting the Germans, so you know it's kind of a thing, you know. So we made alcohol illegal for a while, and then we made it not illegal anymore. 1937, marijuana was made illegal. This has a very interesting story, which many of you probably know. Like, in short, there was a paper mogul who had a big paper business, and the hemp industry, you can make like really good cheap paper out of hemp. It was kind of like competing with him. So he had this big like racist campaign against like Mexicans and black people to make sure that marijuana got a really bad reputation. There's a lot of like media propaganda to like sort of spread the sentiment. I'm not even saying marijuana is good, but that's kind of what happened. It's not as bad as all that, you know. 1968, LSD was made illegal. 1970, we have the Controlled Substances Act. The Controlled Substances Act under Nixon was really taking all of these various like laws and regulations that we had and codifying it under federal law to make it like, okay, here we have this one act and this deals with like all the drugs. This is where the scheduling system was introduced as well that we already looked at. And then 1986, there was the Federal Analog Act. I suspect between 1970 and 86, there was a lot of chemists inventing things. That would be my suspicion anyway. So that's a brief history of the legality of drugs in America. Now, of course, we have a very large marijuana legalization movement. And so this is a big thing. I guess we'll take a look at that in a second, shall we not? How do other countries handle drugs? So as with cryptocurrency, the last topic, or whatever kind of laws, there's a range, right? So in China, Philippines, Indochina, except for Cambodia, I believe, but like Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, some places in the Middle East will execute traffickers. So if you are caught going through an airport with some amount of drugs, it's like either a mandatory death penalty or like maybe a death penalty or probably a death penalty. Like that's a very real possibility. For drug traffickers, they kill you. And then for drug users, it might be whatever, like a long prison sentence or forced labor or whatever kind of things. Pretty harsh rules around drugs. In some parts of the world, the vast majority of countries, like drugs are illegal. It's kind of all the same categories of drugs, some kind of exceptions, but mostly just, drugs that we think of as drugs are illegal. You'll have fines for using them. Legal issues, of course, jail time. Some places have mandatory like rehab or treatment, which may or may not actually be rehab or treatment. This is for use, distribution, and manufacture. So most countries don't kill you for like being involved with drugs, but most countries do punish you for being involved with drugs, right? And then for some places in the world, much of South America, including Mexico, famously Portugal, but also from this map, apparently like Spain, Italy, etc., drug use is decriminalized. So if you have a small amount of some drugs, it won't be a criminal offense. It won't go on your record. You won't go to jail. There could be some penalties associated with it, though. So once again, we have kind of a slew of different approaches. The most famous of the decriminalized drug use countries is Portugal. And so we'll see a lot of evidence about that. But I would recommend to look into these other places as well, especially Mexico, given its proximity to the U.S. How is it working out there? Yeah. And here's a bigger map for you to pause if you want to peruse. Okay. So what is the status quo in the U.S.? Where are we at now? What's our relationship with drugs, legally speaking? So we have 2 million people in jail in the U.S. That's 1 out of every 150 Americans is in jail. That is the largest prison population in the world, the second largest per capita, but America is the third most populous country, so that's not saying a whole lot. Fully half of the people in American prisons are there for drug offenses. Half are there for drug offenses. The most common drug offense that people are arrested for is possession of drugs. The most common drug that people are busted for possession of is marijuana. So this is for possession, and the vast majority of those are small quantities. So the vast majority of arrests are for possessing small quantities of marijuana. It's not like anything, harmful. It's not drunk driving. It's not like violence. It's simple marijuana possession. That's number one arrest offense, even today in the U.S. There is a very large marijuana legalization movement. So we have 18 states in the U.S. now that, under state law, have legalized marijuana, right? And 19 states have it, and 19 additional states have it for medical use. I believe these numbers are current. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they may be, perhaps. Very quickly, we will have the vast majority, and already we're at a majority of states in America with some kind of legalized weed, right? And so this obviously poses something of a conundrum for the federal government. It's like, okay, all of the people want legal weed. All of the states already have legal weed. What should the federal government do? Now, of course, the U.S. federal government has fought a long drug war, roped many other countries into their drug war. And so it's a little bit of a 180, right? Even over the course of several decades to say, okay, we have to eliminate public enemy number one drugs. And not just us, we got to have all of our allies cooperate in stopping the manufacture and distribution and import-export of these drugs, to saying, okay, no, never mind, it's fine. It's fine. That would be absurd for marijuana, much less all drugs, which is what we're proposing here. Oregon, very interesting case in point. Oregon in 2021, this year, decriminalized small amounts of all drugs. So using any kind of drug is not legal in Oregon. It's not like there's no problem with it. You can still have fines and mandatory treatment. You can't legally sell these drugs, but to be caught with a small amount of them is not a criminal offense anymore in Oregon. So that's a first. Some cities have started to decriminalize other things, sort of like, the trend in, whatever, 80s, 90s, 2000s, cities one by one decriminalizing weed. Now we have cities one by one decriminalizing psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in mushrooms, and other psychedelic drugs. So there is certainly a movement towards decriminalization, a movement towards legalization at the state and city level, but the federal level still has marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug. Okay, so that's where we've been, where we're at, roughly. Let's talk about some of the arguments, shall we? So, here is my quick pitch for pro. Read along with me. The current approach to drugs has been a massive and unqualified failure, leaving death and destruction in its wake, particularly for minorities in the United States. We have relearned the lessons of alcohol prohibition from 100 years ago. It doesn't work, and it only makes the problems associated with drugs much worse. To save money, to uphold American values, let's, and what, I don't know. Oh, and end the destruction of American lives, let us legalize. So, the drug war is probably the most, I have all, these four different arguments in order of how much evidence we have for them, essentially. How much you'll see this as the major issue of drug prohibition in the media, in the literature, and I really think it's probably how much oomph they really all have, right? The drug war kills people. It's a war. It kills people. American values of freedom, that's a nice framework. It's a little bit, it's not so easy to grasp exactly why American values are using drugs, but it's a good argument nonetheless. So let's start with the drug war, shall we? The drug war has been fought for 50-ish years, once again, since the 1970s. It's really taken its modern form with the Controlled Substances Act under Nixon. And it is, once again, as we said, currently the number one reason for arrests. So this is Stella 19. We have 1.6 million arrests for marijuana possession alone, not even on any other drugs in 2018. The drug war, the goal is really just to stop all drugs. I mean, that's at least sort of the stated goal. Let's stop people from using drugs, selling drugs, having drugs. Let's clean up America. That is, let's fight all the people who are using or involved in drugs in any way. Let's fight them, and that is what the war is, in fact. This leads to over-policing, so police receive anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the tens of billions of dollars in the drug war budget. That's Hart 21. We can draw many analogies between, once again, alcohol prohibition and drug prohibition, right? It doesn't work. We've already been through this. It doesn't work. It doesn't work, right? So this is Thornton 91. If you think that 30-year-old evidence is too old to use, remember it's talking about history. So, if 30-year-old evidence is okay if we're talking about a 100-year-old thing. One of the biggest things that leads to an immense amount of violence, but also overdoses. So how does this happen? So we have the government of Mexico and other countries, and the U.S. and other countries, fighting against drug traffickers, right? So obviously these things are illegal, right? And so for drug traffickers in Mexico, most famously the cartels, if they have any kind of disputes or any kind of an issue, they can't take them to court because it's illegal, right? So if someone steals your cocaine, you can't take them to court and say, hey, you stole my cocaine. So there's no kind of like justice or legal system that they can use. The only thing they can use is the law of the street, right? So you go shoot the person, right? That's the only thing you can do. And so, obviously, these cartels are famous for extreme violence, not just casual violence, not just shooting people, but really sending warnings to people by stringing up bodies from bridges and chopping off the heads of bunches of people, putting them in town squares as a message that, we control this city. You do what I say. There's not an option here. And really, there's not an option. You have to do what they say or you'll be one of those bodies. This is Grillo 18 who talks about this absurd amount of violence in Mexico. Once again, tens of thousands of people every year are killed in Mexico due to drug violence. But also tens of thousands of people die of overdoses in the U.S. And a big part of this is opioids, opiates, heroin, but really more fentanyl. It's very hard to know if you buy heroin what's in it, right? Because once again, if it's sold at a store, there's FDA requirements, right? It has to be tested for whatever rat parts and insect parts or whatever. So you make sure you're getting some kind of quality control with products. But if you're buying on the black market, there are no such guarantees. And so adulterants are put in. Fentanyl is kind of an adulterant. It gets you high way easier. So, essentially it's cheaper than heroin, so people can make more money. And so this leads to a lot of overdoses, right? If you don't know what you're putting in your body, you put in the wrong thing, like you can die pretty easily. And you're not going to get it tested by something because it's illegal, so you'll go to jail if you try to get it tested. If there is an overdose, in the absence of Good Samaritan laws where, let's say your friend is having a drug overdose and you're getting high too, you can call the police and you won't get in trouble because you're trying to help your friend. In the absence of those kind of laws, a lot of people aren't going to seek medical attention because it's illegal. You could go to jail for trying to get help. So it leads to potentially to tens of thousands of deaths per year in the U.S. Really nasty stuff. One good frame in terms of the drug war is that legalization, which Pro is advocating for here, is defunding. So if you have any literature or passion about defunding police, defunding prisons, that's what legalization does, right? Once again, 2/3 minimum of the drug war budget goes to police. So you want to take away tens of billions of dollars from the police, legalize. Same for prisons, right? You have, if you make drugs legal, then half of the prisoners in the U.S. are not in prison anymore. Perhaps retroactively, that might be ideal if we were to expunge all their records and let them out of jail, but at least future prisoners, at the minimum, for-profit prisons are not their coffers are not being expanded by our antiquated drug laws. So, tons of material here. I've only scratched the surface, but the drug war is, in fact, a truly awful, damaging thing, destroys people's lives, rips apart communities in as many ways as you can think. Now, the last thing I wanted to add a bullet point here, but there's just way too much material on it, is racism. That the drug war is structurally and inherently racist. Turtles all the way down. It's racism all the way down. So at every point of the way, when we look at the numbers, we can see that the drug war is discriminatory, mostly racist, but also it's homophobic. It's also classist. So Hart 21 talks about this, about scheduling. So we already looked at how the government treats different kinds of drugs, Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3. And this is based on racist, homophobic, and classist perceptions. Let me explain. Black people are more often to use crack cocaine. White people are more likely to use powdered cocaine. Crack cocaine is often punished worse than powdered cocaine. And in fact, it's seen by our society as worse. Y'all, it's the same goddamn thing. It's cocaine. Homophobia. So perhaps gay people the gay community is famous for methamphetamine use. Okay, so methamphetamine is bad. Gay people use it, right? Gay people get high on meth. That's a bad thing. How about amphetamines? It's the same thing. In terms of the effect on your body, it's the same thing. But amphetamines are fine. Amphetamines are used by college students, by, they get their drugs from doctors. It's okay, right? So we have these different categories for drugs based on, not on chemistry, not on physiology, on social ideas, right? Social discriminatory perceptions. Also classist ideas, right? So if you get painkillers from the doctor, you are a responsible patient. If you're using heroin, that is awful, right? And the same thing with meth, right? Meth is typically used by poor people, I guess. But amphetamines is used by, people just trying to get an edge at their job. It's different, guys. So even, and we talk about categorizing things already we got some issues here. But also in enforcement. So enforcement, this is HOOD Act 21, aims to stigmatize, jail, control, and police minority communities. Black Americans are 3.6 times more likely to be arrested for weed. even though they use weed about the same as white people. By many measures, less than white people, they're still 3.6 times more likely. That's 360% more likely to be arrested for weed. And that's just one stat. There are many others. You could have many cases just based on racism. And then sentencing as well. Black Americans are prosecuted more harshly than white Americans. We'll take a look at these graphs. So next activity, let's try to answer racism. We're going to be doing a lot of rebuttals here in terms of the exercises. So yeah, pause the video before we get to these bubbles. Try to come up with your own rebuttal if you're on the con side. Pro runs racism. How are you going to respond to that? Let's take a look at these graphs first, though. So black people are treated more harshly for drug possession. This is a cocaine possession. And I believe this is a difference in crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. I don't know that for sure. Once again, it's the same thing. But white people are much more likely to just be cautioned. Said, hey, don't do that again. I don't want to see you again in here. Get out of here, you little rascal. Whereas black people are locked up. Racial disparities. Black people use less drugs than white people, but are 6 times, 600% more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs. Use percent. It seems bigger. 600% more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs. Insane. Once again, these are just a couple of stats. There's many more. All right, what's an answer to racism? How could COD potentially answer racism? Here's my ideas, my thoughts. There's just no solvency. We're not going to get rid of racism by legalizing drugs. Like, really? Is that really what you think? You really think that racism is such a shallow, surface level thing that a single policy change is going to eradicate it? Look, we've already tried. It's the amazing thing on this topic is we have plenty of evidence from marijuana legalization. Some evidence from other countries. Once again, no country has straight up legalized all drugs, so that hasn't happened. But we have straight up legalized weed in many states, and that's an amazing thing about the American system, the federal system, the state system, that we can experiment, we can try different things, we can see what works, what doesn't work. It's really cool. We can do a bunch of legal experiments. I love America. All right, legalization doesn't solve. It doesn't stop racist arrests. We know this. Cooper and Thompson 20. Quote, this is quoting someone else, I don't remember who. In every state that has legalized or decriminalized marijuana possession, black people are still more likely to be arrested for possession than white people. Right? Because there's some things that are still illegal, right? You still can't smoke in public. You still can't smoke around schools. You can't, sell it. So there's, this is for marijuana possession, but there's still some contexts where possession might be wrong. Black people are more likely to be arrested for it than white people. Once again, they use less drugs and are arrested and stopped and searched more. So racism is not such a simple problem that you can solve it with like a policy change, okay? You can't just outlaw racism. You can try. It won't work, brah. I wish I had a better answer to that, but I don't think I think so this is a solid argument. So yeah, this is a good one. If you want to win. All right, let's talk now about the, so war on drugs, bad. That's kind of where we were at before. How could we answer that? So this is the next rebuttal exercise. How could you answer the war on drugs? I would pause this video and write it down. Write down your answer, or at least say it out loud using words out of your mouth. Commit yourself to something. Pause the video. Commit. Here's my answers. Prison population since war on drugs. Prison population is mostly from drugs. All right, my answers. So the drug war is bad. Yes, fine. I don't think that the con side can say it's fine. I think in an ideal world, in public forum, so public forum is supposed to be simple. That's the whole thing of public forum. It's supposed to be simple. It's supposed to be just straightforward, not too complicated, like get in, get out, that's supposed to be public forum. So ideally, we'd stay simple. Pro advocates a policy change. Con advocates the status quo. Con says what we got going is fine. That's what we should have. But there's some cases, and I think this is one where con can't really defend the status quo. I mean, really what you could argue, okay, this is what we have. It's really a debate about would our world be better or would it be worse if we legalized all drugs. We're not looking at other alternatives. We're just looking at, would it be better or would it be worse? So I think that's really the case that pro should make if Khan tries to advocate other things. But look, I'm really saying, I don't think Khan can defend the status quo per se. There's many other things you could hint towards. The drug war is bad. I think Khan needs to admit that. The drug war is bad. The current policies we have are bad. They probably need to be changed. You can't say it's perfect. You can't even say it's good, probably. But look, legalizing drugs will lead to more harm than the drug war. The opioid epidemic proves. We have 80,000 people dying every year from illegal opium. We've already seen by the graph that when drugs are legalized, people use drugs more. We've seen that with marijuana. Actually, teen use doesn't go up. You know why? Because teens are not allowed to go to the weed store. But adult use does go up because adults are allowed to go to the weed store. If you're allowed to use drugs, you're going to use more drugs, right? Opioid epidemic is killing 80,000 people every year. Imagine if it was legal. Imagine what would happen if that was legal. If you go to the heroin store, that wouldn't get better, bro. That's going to get way, 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 way worse. That's Felbab Brown. What a cool name. Legalizing next. So we have, different impacts of the drug war, right? And so your response is going to have to be kind of tailored to the impact, perhaps. And so one of them is violence. Legalizing also won't stop cartel violence. They're complex, diversified crime entities. Longmire 11, fantastic article about this. Essentially, look, they're involved in prostitution, in gambling, in rackets. They're involved in a lot of legal businesses too, right? And so if you legalize, will the cartels make less money? Yeah, probably. Are they going to go away? No. Nope. They're not going to go away. They're still going to definitely be there. They're still going to be violent, right? I mean, plenty of things putting taxes, cartel taxes on different products, or, just extortion. You get people to pay them for protection, quote unquote protection. And if they don't, then you kill them. That's what cartels literally do. Legalizing drugs seems like a nice solution. It's not. Okay. So next is harm reduction and health. And this is sort of multifaceted. So harm reduction is just, let's try to, we have this thing with bad effects. Let's try to make the bad effects less bad. We're not going to eliminate them. We're also not going to make it illegal, right? So example of harm reduction in other areas, I love this. Sunscreen. We don't make it illegal to go in the sun. We offer sunscreen, and you can use umbrellas. You can stay out of the sun, right? We don't make it illegal. We don't make cars illegal. We put in seatbelts and speed limits. We don't make sex illegal. We provide birth control. We don't make tobacco illegal. We put filters in cigarettes. I don't know how much they help. Maybe they do. I don't know. They probably do, right? So that's what we're looking for drugs. We're looking to reduce the harm, not make it illegal. Different tools we could use would be drug testing, right? So, the same way food and pharmaceuticals are tested, we should be testing recreational drugs. We should make treatment and rehab for people who are addicted and want some kind of help. We should make that more available to them, right? Legalization will unleash the arsenal of tools that we have for harm reduction. So we can start to actually do this, right? Just really in all of the same ways that pharmaceuticals are well enough controlled, right? We have systems in place for prescriptions and quality testing, et cetera. We should apply the same things to recreational drugs as we do, for example, for alcohol. So for intravenous drug users, IV drug users from UN AIDS 20, bloodborne illnesses are a big issue, right? HIV is the most famous one, also hepatitis, number of other, there's many bloodborne diseases, right? 12% of new HIV infections are from IV drug users. Legalization solves because, once again, we can have needle exchanges. These are sort of government programs where you hand out needles. Same as, once again, we'd maybe hand out condoms in some places, I don't know if places hand out sunscreen, maybe they should, but hand out clean needles, right? Right now, in a lot of places, we don't do this because it, quote unquote, sends the wrong message. We don't want to be encouraging people to say, it's normal and fine to use IV drugs. And hey, I don't know, maybe there's something to it, but what should our goal be? If our ultimate goal is to prevent the spread of disease and prevent deaths, then we need some systems for harm reduction. There's no other way around it. It's not like our current approach works. But also, so for both mental and physical health, I have mental health listed here and in the evidence, but there's plenty of physical health things. there's a lot of, for example, these Schedule 1 drugs like psychedelics, MDMA, that have some potential for medical use, right? If, let's say, weed is good for physical pain, right? It'll help your appetite. It's really good for cancer patients, just for people in pain. Let's say that MDMA, it seems to help with trauma, so kind of psychic pain can be just really amazing results from assisted MDMA use for trauma, things like PTSD, and also for depression, for helping to make some strides in a clinical setting towards overcoming different mental health issues. Also psychedelics, perhaps some kind of medicine for the soul, as it were, that can really have some transformative effects on people, especially when used in the right supervised context. And so once again, legalization opens the doors. These drugs haven't been studied extensively enough, and certainly not been used as treatments widely, not because they're not effective. No, they're highly powerful compounds, but they're illegal, right? They're not just illegal, they're Schedule 1 illegal. They're super illegal. No accepted medical use at all, according to the government, right? And so legalization, once again, just opens up all of these doors. All right, so Pro says, let's legalize, because all of these like dangers surrounding the drugs can be, and a lot of the benefits also can be sort of worked with for legalization. What could be an answer to this? So I would honestly, this is just very, very simple logic. Many drugs kill people. Yes or no? I mean, alcohol kills an immense amount of people. Cigarettes kill like 500,000 people a year in America. I mean, definitely drugs kill, right? Okay, next. Legalization will increase access to these drugs. Is this true or not true? If it's not true, then what does legalization mean? Legalization must mean some kind of system where it's easier to get access to them, even if it's, sort of pharmaceutical system. I mean, even to something as extreme or conservative as that, it's still easier to access them. Therefore, legalizing drugs will lead to more deaths. That's Westervelt 21, but I mean, obviously it's true, right? Plus, we know that people use legal drugs more than illegal drugs. We've seen that, in a lot of places. Saw that on the graph. So legalizing drugs will lead to more deaths. I think this is very simple logic and very hard to refute. So marijuana is a great case in point. Adults use more of it when it's legalized in their state. But with weed, it doesn't kill people. So let's say we got lucky with it, right? There might be many other negative effects of weed that will come out by more adults using them. But one of those effects it's not instantaneous death. If it kills you, it's slowly, right? So that would be the answer. Like, okay, we're going to have more people dying. Is that harm reduction or is that harm increase? To me, it sounds like harm increase. And, one of the just very general things for con, the reason this could be a tricky case for Pro to argue is just none of these are really non-unique. Like, even with drugs being illegal, can't we also have needle exchanges? Can't we also have drug testing? Can't we also have rehab, even if it's illegal? Can't we have, some reclassification of psychedelics and MDMA while keeping them, highly controlled? So once again, going to, kind of the sort of counterplay and alternative kind of territory, but like, that's what I'm into. Just be careful out there. Economics. So this will come up at every topic because it just does. The drug war exists largely because of political and profit motives. Political motives, the church in America has huge political control, right? Its ability to influence just votes and public opinion and everything. And the church is very anti-drugs. And so these are the kind of the political movement, political reasons. If any politician were to advocate legalizing all drugs, this position, they would be immediately deposed. Like, no one's going to vote for someone who wants to legalize all drugs. Even decriminalizing all drugs it may as well be the same thing politically, just impossible, right? Even decriminalizing weed at a federal level, weed itself, I mean, that hasn't happened. It's still Schedule 1. May I remind you for the 17th time? So Miron 13 has a good card on this. It's all about law enforcement profits and prison profits, political power. There's tons of very powerful people whose livelihood and whose power relies on the drug war. So we end the drug war through legalization. These people are going to lose their money, lose their jobs, lose their positions, lose their power. So they're not going to do it. Drug war costs a lot of money. So it costs $58 billion a year. That's Grillo 18 to run the drug war. But we could add $85 billion a year to a balance sheet. It might be more, probably double the Grillo number would be more appropriate. I don't know if this is inflation or what the different metrics are, but Miron 13 says $85 billion between, first, not spending so much money to combat drugs, but also taxing drugs, right? So states that have legalized marijuana have seen some tax increase. I mean, it hasn't been like life-changing. It's not like, weed is the major part of any economy, but it's nice. It helps. Jobs, 300,000 jobs in the weed industry now. Rosalsky 21. If you're going to run this as a contention, add alcohol, add tobacco. I mean, I'm sure we clear several million between the three. And so we legalize other drugs. That's going to be like tons of jobs, tons of tax money. Obviously, all of the benefits of any of the drug war at all, even the non-economic ones. So altogether, just great. I'm just realizing that this picture looks like someone's about to snort a line of weed. Hey kids, don't snort weed. Let's think about the answers. How can we answer economics? A lot of these will just be stock answers, obviously, but pause, think if you can come up with those stock answers. So answer to economics. This is the major stock answer. I just don't think for most topics, I mean, cryptocurrency probably, right? There's some topics, but for most topics, there's like more important things going on than money in terms of the debate. So here we go. Economics is not a compelling reason to legalize something. We could legalize murder, which would provide jobs to hitmen and tax revenue from the hitmen's customers. Is that a good reason to legalize? Hell no. Don't legalize something just because it would make money. But more importantly, look, once again, we have this experiment we've been running. Different states have been legalizing marijuana. So we can see what happened with marijuana. And what we see is that the economic benefits have been minimal. They've been really overstated. It's not like these states are rich, have gotten like rich off of the marijuana taxes, or like, the local economies have been totally transformed, or like a bunch of people have moved there. Like whatever economic benefit it is fairly minimal. So, yeah, just whatever impacts that pro might have in terms of economics are like probably kind of overstated. It's not really a big deal. We can't say it will like cost more money, but it's not really going to make that much money at all. Economics. Let's go to American values. Once again, probably the most of all of these. And I don't even have the little AT bubble just because actually it's pretty solid, but it's just kind of, I don't know. I'm not sure what the impacts here are. So public opinion, Davies 18. And Newsweek 21, 2/3 of Americans support decriminalizing all drugs. By the way, that number seems wrong to me, but I don't know. You'd have to look into the poll, but it seems high. If you're going to use that evidence, make sure you know what the poll methodology is so you can defend it. Quote, Miron 13, also some great quotes from Hart. There's just so much quotable stuff from Hart, but this is a good one from Miron. If you believe in anything that the Americans claim to believe in, freedom, individuality, personal responsibility, you have to legalize drugs, right? This is about body autonomy. It's about, what is the word I'm looking for? Libertarianism. Just, unless you're hurting someone else, you should be able to do what you want. That's what America is about. So, solid American values. If you're a patriot, you should run this. I know I would. Okay, some odds and ends. You can talk about state level regulations being better. So, at the federal level, as of right now, I think, although it could be changed by now, a woman's access to an abortion is legal, and states can't even regulate it, right? But states can have their own laws about abortion. So like Texas, Mississippi, the southern conservative states famously have more restrictive abortion laws. And so the same thing could happen with drugs, right? Like states can put in whatever regulations they want. If you legalized at the federal level, It doesn't mean states or cities have to do anything special. Like they can do what they want. Another good benefit of legalizing all drugs would be reparative justice, expunging records. So once again, we have millions of people in jail for drug offenses. A million-ish. I think upwards of 1 million people in jail for drug offenses. If we legalized, we could retroactively make their sentences disappear so they don't have criminal records anymore, especially for non-violent crimes, get them out of jail, forgive their whatever fines they had. And so there's a lot of good we could do when alongside legalizing, right? We could really take a big chunk of the harm that we've done through the drug war and set it right. We're not going to do everything. We're not even going to do most of it, but we can do what we can do, and legalizing at the federal level, that's one step. Then we have our cases of success. So Portugal, once again, the super, super famous country since 2000 has decriminalized all drugs, and Oregon, since this year, has also decriminalized all drugs. And both of these cases show that the countries won't go up in flames if it happens, right? And I think you're going to hear this a lot, Portugal and Oregon. So if you're AF, you should try to find some other cases because, if you're neg, you should be definitely ready for Portugal and Oregon. I'm about to prepare you for them. But I don't know answers to like Germany and Spain. So for AF, I would definitely look into those. And also like the South American examples, Mexico, etc. I would look into those other places that have decriminalized drugs, find all the success stories and run those in your case. I feel like those could be extremely convincing. All right. You're probably not going to know this, but go ahead and pause it. Come with an answer if you'd like to. Both places, Portugal and Oregon, have decriminalized drugs. That is not the same thing as legalizing drugs. Legalizing means you can sell them, you can market them, you can, you can distribute them, you can put them in soda pop, right? Like you can make little lounges for people to consume the drugs. Like that's legalization. Decriminalization doesn't mean it's okay. We're still saying it's not good, it's illegal. We're just not throwing people in jail for it. So that's a different thing altogether. And Portugal and Oregon are not success stories. I mean, from the neg's perspective. Portugal, this is true, Frank 20, saw murders and drug use increase after implementation. It seems people have experimented with drugs more after implementation. Although this may not have been a causal effect, it did happen, right? Portugal did see some good numbers, but most of this was not from decriminalizing drugs. Most of this was from their harm reduction strategies, which along with decriminalization really helped. So if the US, for example, legalized drugs alongside harm reduction strategies, perhaps we would have some success. That's not our topic, though. That would be a additional or counter plan. So we're not talking about those harm reduction strategies at all. Although AF should argue that they'd be, easier to implement. Oregon. So Oregon's implementation has already been a disaster. The healthcare system wasn't ready. The answer to card we have, I don't have that listed here, but it's in the evidence. It's just a slew of different issues, right? Issues with law enforcement, cops, politicians. It's not good, guys. It's not good. So that's Portugal and Oregon. You're going to hear about those a lot. And because of that, I think if you're watching this video, I'm just cluing you into the fact, like, if you're AF, choose different countries. That's all I'm saying. All right. That is pro. Let us go to con. Once again, my brief pitch. And to reiterate this again, I don't think con can defend the status quo per se. I think con has to... I think con has to keep pro away from the legalization goalpost. But there's a large swath of middle ground territory that con can fight for, right? And you're not fighting for a particular place in that middle ground because that's a counter plan, perhaps. But, you just really want to non-unique everything the pro has, right? Like there's nothing that pro wants to do that you need to legalize all of the hundreds of illegal drugs for. That's so absurd. Honestly, that is ridiculous. Like who picked this topic? Con's going to win every single round, hands down. That's the attitude you should go into every round with if you're con. Okay, so America's drug policies clearly need to change, but legalizing all drugs is clearly not the answer. The top 3 most deadly drugs are all legal. Do we want to add more drugs to the list, kill more Americans? I think no. Big tobacco and big alcohol are lobbying monstrosities that control our government. Big weed is quickly joining them. What's next? Big heroin? Big hundreds of other lobbies, big psychedelics. So here, look, we have only like 3 real arguments, but I think they're good. I think they're the first 2 especially, I think are good arguments. So, yeah, in conjunction with the fact that pro has to defend absurdity, we've got a couple of solid arguments here. So I think you're going to be set for con. So corporations, once again, if you legalize something, that means corporations can take that thing over, right? It means they can market it. You know, we wouldn't have 500,000 tobacco deaths every year if we didn't have big tobacco. Like, everyone knows cigarettes are bad. What if we just stopped selling them, stopped marketing them? Like, gave people alternatives to get off of them. Like, no one is confused about them, but we still make it legal for these companies to kill 500,000 people every year, to murder 500,000 Americans every year, legally, while making a ton of money. That's legal. That's totally fine. And that's what we're going to have times 1,000 if we legalize drugs. The Fed is too corrupt for drug regulations. The opioid epidemic proves the opioid epidemic was fueled, once again, by legal drugs, right? I highly recommend this mini documentary from Vanguard. It's probably 6 or 7 years old. It's called Oxycontin Express. Fantastic documentary about the state of the opioid industry in Florida, and how, yeah, these legal prescription drugs from doctors have just wreaked havoc on American communities. Lopez 17. Here's a thing. Amazon is lobbying for legal weed. That's Fertig and Meyer 21. If Amazon is trying to get its greedy, dirty little paws in our marijuana, you know that's cause for concern. Do you think Amazon's not also going to try to get in cocaine and psychedelics and anywhere else it can make money? I mean, this is opening Pandora's box to a horrible, this really dystopian world that we already live in, right? Of the vast commercialization and corporatization of every facet of American life. Like, we are simply blowing this up. And also, once again, for drugs that are very, very harmful, many of these are like indisputably incredibly harmful. And look, the most harmful drug in the world, cigarettes, totally legal. We don't want more of that. Okay, so how could we answer this? If we're AF, how could we answer Con's corporatization argument? I don't really have this very well developed, honestly, but I think I would probably try to write a case around this if I were a Con. I think there's something to it, you know? Here's my answer. All coffee shops and bar chains are technically corporate drug dealers that profit off addiction. That's technically what every Starbucks is. Should we ban them all as well? Is that what we want? If you're selling a drug to make money, we should make it illegal? We want to really make coffee shops illegal? Well, if your answer is no, then we have to apply the same logic to other drugs. Now, you might say coffee is not the same thing as heroin, and my dear sir or ma'am, you would be right. But how about alcohol? How about cigarettes, right? Like, these are all corporate drug dealers that profit off addiction. We should really be focused on ending the harms of these drugs, giving people options to get off of them, making their lives better, and not on making it illegal, right? If someone has a problem, we shouldn't be making it worse through prohibition. Also, Con has this sort of head in the clouds idea about, Amazon taking over the weed industry. Look, that's not necessarily going to happen, right? There's many things that are legal that don't have big corporate backing, right? So eating dirt is legal. It's totally legal. You can go outside and grab a handful of dirt and eat it, and no one will stop you, although they should if you have any good friends. But the big dirt lobby hasn't sprouted up to be selling people dirt, right? So it's not like necessary that because it's legal, therefore it will happen. Also, look, we've learned our lessons from corporatization. We know that there needs to be more government oversight. We've learned our lessons. Like, we can do this better for other kinds of illegal drugs, right? I mean, we don't have an epidemic for every drug, even though a lot of the harmful prescription ones, like the doctors, hospitals, medical systems, and laws really are in a place where we kind of know how to deal with these things now. So those are my quick thoughts. Increased use. So this is probably the most obvious con argument is make drugs legal, more people are going to use drugs, more people are going to die, more people are going to suffer the harms. Let's take a look. So once again, I hate to keep banging this, but it's such a good stat. Lopez 14. Then look, legalization will normalize and increase use. Kaplan 21, more people use alcohol and nicotine versus illegal drugs. We know this is a fact. We also know that when states make marijuana illegal, people who can get access to that legal weed use more of it. And so that's going to probably happen with other drugs. It's happened with, these 3 drugs. Why would it not happen with the 4th? Marijuana legalization also has a bunch of bad things about it. If Pro tries to run any kind of success stories for marijuana, I think we got to pull out this Sabbat 21 card. I don't know if I have this under the rebuttal section, but I think I do. It's bad. Look, we have an increase in car accidents, increase in teen use of marijuana. That's Sabbat 21. I think I saw another source where that didn't happen, but we also have, marijuana is not good for you. Especially with long-term use, we have your brain degrades. You have long-term issues with memory, especially for teens who are using that, issues with emotional control, really issues with addiction. So, we can't say marijuana is just this harmless thing. There's been a lot of bad things about legalization. Also, we're pretty new into it, so a lot of the long-term effects we don't know, but based on what we do know about long-term marijuana consumption, they're likely to be very bad. Okay, so we have more drug use and much, much, much worse drugs, right, that are being used more when we legalize all drugs. How do we answer this? AT drug harm. So, flip this stat on its head. They say the 3 most dangerous drugs are all legal. Yes, that is exactly why we need to legalize all drugs. We should not have 2 standards. If the 3 most dangerous drugs are all legal, what are we doing with these hundreds of less dangerous drugs? Definitionally less dangerous drugs. The neg side admits to this. They admit that the 3 most dangerous drugs are legal. Therefore, the hundreds of other drugs are less dangerous. So let's not have 2 standards. Let's make them all legal. We can control them. We can regulate them. We can put limitations in place. We can put time, age, place limitations in place. But let's stop trying to just control Americans. Let the government tell, responsible adults everything they can do with their bodies. And let's legalize all drugs. Skipper 21 says the harms of drugs are vastly overblown, and the majority of drug users don't become addicted. Furthermore, the notions of acceptability, as we've already gone over, are not accurate, and they're based on discriminatory stereotypes. So, you think heroin is really bad, but you don't think that your uncle who, got a hip replacement is bad for taking, Vicodin from the doctor. It's the same thing. You don't think that your, college-age sister is bad for or your friend who has ADHD is bad for taking speed, right? You do think the poor guy in the meth house is bad because he smokes meth, right? So our ideas of what's good and what's not good are really based on discriminatory stereotypes and not on the reality of pharmacology. Definitely break out that word, by the way. Use pharmacology once or twice in your case. You got to use a lot of words like that so people know you're smart. Political DAs. I don't really have a whole lot on this, but oh my God, I'm 1 hour and 28 minutes into this video and I didn't make this slide. I copied and pasted it, increased use. Let me just tell you about this. So this is about treaties. So in the evidence, it'll be kind of under treaties. I was actually thinking about, before I failed to make this slide, several other politics things. So the biggest thing is just in terms of domestic politics is that, as with any politics DA, it takes a lot of political capital to change something as ossified and set in stone as American drug policy. So if you use all of that political capital to legalize all drugs, which would just take an immense amount of political capital, you have to make all these kind of concessions to whoever else. So like, let's say if the Democrats legalize all drugs, that means the entire Republican agenda will almost de facto have to be like approved by the Democrats. How else will they gather the political will in order to make it happen, right? You need Republican, cooperation to pass a lot of these laws through the legislature, through Congress. But we could talk about the solvency of, let's say, executive actions, like Biden just, unilaterally deciding to make these like drastic changes to the drug policy. Doesn't seem like that's something he could really do, or that he should do. I mean, that seems like probably a bad idea. Just, not even having a referendum of the states or of voters or going through normal legislative methods. So that's one thing, is just the complex milieu of politics that would have to happen in order to get them legalized. Second biggest thing under treaties. So the U.S. is not by itself in having drugs illegal. In fact, every country in the world has drugs are illegal in every country in the world. As far as I know, I don't think there's any country in the world with legal drugs. Maybe de facto, some drugs are legal. They're not enforced, whatever. But according to the law, they're all illegal. And in most places, they're like quite illegal, right? It's like one of the worst things you can do in terms of your criminal record. So the U.S. has signed on to, I believe, three major treaties. Three major treaties to limit the manufacture, sale, distribution, trafficking of drugs, right? And so if the U.S. federal government legalized drugs, that is breaking those treaties. The U.S. is breaking those treaties that it helped to create, that it has helped to enforce for decades. Now, what kind of message does this send to our allies if we start to break our treaties by giving in to the whims of a drug-addicted populace? This tells our allies, well, they can also break the treaties, obviously. I mean, that's obvious. We're being flexible. They can be flexible too. I mean, we're the granddaddy of these treaties, and we're breaking the rules, so the rules are out the door. But it's not just that. I mean, the spill-on effects could go to other treaties. So what does it do to the international order when the policemen of the liberal democratic world order, the U.S., starts to just throw all the rules out the window? I think there's a lot of potential in there, although I haven't done a ton of research into it. In fact, I don't even have a slide in my presentation, but I do think there's a lot of good potential there. Okay, so that's different politics, DAs, and treaties and the evidence. And then finally, we'll look at alternative fixes. And I hate to just hammer this home, but be careful, I suppose, right? With counterplans. Let's say they're not counterplans, okay? Fine, they're not counterplans. They're not CPs, y'all. But there are some alternatives you could throw out there. So don't prepare one of these as a plan. No, we should do this instead. But just these are all the things that will non-unique most of the pros arguments. So if some drugs are helpful, maybe we should legalize some drugs, not all drugs. That's too many. So maybe if marijuana is helpful, legalize it. If psychedelics are helpful, legalize it. Or we could reschedule them, right? We could put them in a better kind of a schedule. We don't have to legalize everything. Come on. Decriminalization. So once again, that would stop all of the harms of prosecuting personal use. It would keep people out of jail. It would stop oppressing minority communities. It would stop, indigenous uses of drugs, of, whatever, peyote and ayahuasca and marijuana and cocoa. These are all criminalized, once again, just an absurd dystopian reality we live in that's just so disconnected from our history and our roots. Decriminalize. We don't have to legalize. A lot of the harm reduction approaches. So if we want to reduce addiction, overdose, disease transmission, we can do this without legalizing. That's not a necessary step. So Feldbad Brown 21, middle ground is much more sensible, and there's a lot of possibility and a lot of different middle grounds. So I really feel like this is the golden ticket to the ballot for con. You're really just blocking all of pro's impacts. So pro, Don't let them block your impacts. I would write up like several responses to these things. This can be your first response. One question is allowed. Judge, would our world be better or would our world be worse if the U.S. federal government legalized all drugs? That is the question we are here to debate today. The answer is, of course, better. And when Con brings before you these other questions, you should ignore them, reject them, and give Pro the ballot for Con's attempt to cheat in this obvious way. These questions are not topical. Let's legalize all drugs. That's the only question that we're here to think about today. All right, that is it for Con. I'm not really sure how to do this weighing section, but I think it is quite helpful. This is what it looks like. These are some potential common weighing mechanisms that we can use. And let's say that your collapse comes down to freedom, like American freedoms for Pro, and Con's collapse comes down to drug harms. How would Pro defend freedom above the harms of drugs? And how would Con weigh drug harms above the values of freedoms? I would say we should try to go for a couple weighing mechanisms on all of these. I have one weighing mechanism on all of them. And also, I'm not going to narrate all of them. This video is at 1 minute, 35 seconds. And you have a pause button on your computer. So pause them where is appropriate. So first, freedom versus drug harms. How would Pro weigh this? Pause, write it down, say it. Here's my answer. Magnitude, potentially, framework. If you could come up with a second or third one, that would be ideal. How would Con weigh drug harms versus freedoms? Here's my answer. Severity, death. Death really trumps a lot of other things. Next, ending the drug war for Pro versus increased drug use for Con. How would Pro weigh this? Here's my answer. Pause the video and read it if you'd like. Probability. Con. How would Con weigh increased use versus ending the drug war? Here's one potential answer. All right, next. Ending the drug war versus alternatives. So Pro says, let's end the drug war. That's the most important thing. Con says, yeah, but there's a lot of other things we can do to get these same benefits. We don't have to get all of the harms of legalizing drugs. We can use some alternatives. So come up with a Pro answer, come up with a Con answer, a Con weighing, Pro weighing, write it down, say it out loud, see what we come up with. Here's what I came up with for Pro. Nothing. And here's what I came up with. Do I have nothing for the rest of these? Am I totally unprepared? Oh my gosh. Health benefits versus corporatization. For alternatives, once again, for Pro, just don't let Con play that card. That's cheating. Just don't, just don't do that. And then for Con, for ending drug war versus the alternatives, okay, Con, look, we're literally just trying to maximize the benefits. And we're not defending the status quo per se, but we're also not defending something as absurd as killing a bunch of Americans every year. I mean, we're going to have minimum hundreds of thousands of deaths from drugs with this changed policy, right? So we're just trying to not defend something absurd like Pro is. Health benefits versus corporatization. Come up with something, please. Please do. Here's what I came up with. Just the scope of all of the health benefits. For Con, corporatization, uniqueness. Perhaps we could win on. And then the case studies. So that would be like Portugal, Oregon, etc. For Con, the harms of all the drugs. How could you weigh this for Pro? Come up with something. Here's what I came up with. I'm so happy I actually have something written here. This is a mess of a presentation. But it's an hour and 40 minutes. I mean, we got to draw the line somewhere, do we not? All right, that's what I have for you. Very happy to give this presentation. This has been fun, as always. Good luck in your tournaments. Good luck in preparation. Good luck in class or wherever you're at. And look forward to seeing you in our Discord. Adios. See you next month. Bye-bye.